Hey, everybody. And this is the last full week of not only regular school for COVID year, but it's also the last regular week of, I guess maybe next week will be normal as well, but there's no exams. But anyhow, we're in the last full week of depression stuff, meaning the Great Depression. And this particular presentation is an interesting one because out of all the IB curriculums I've ever worked with, this is the only one that has required you to know something about the culture of what was appearing at the time and specifically be able to comment on that. So, that being said, they want you to know about four different distinct areas. One of them is photography, one's motion pictures, one's radio, and of course, the other one being literature. So, photography during the Great Depression was very important because there were a lot of people who were very good photographers, and they were hired by the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, using skills. They understood the rule of thirds and all kinds of other things, but they were professionals, and they went out and they were given the charge of documenting what was going on in this very unusual time in American history. Everybody understood it was a historic period of time, nothing like it before, hopefully nothing like it in the future. But they wanted to have a record. And sure, you could, have diaries that people kept and things, but nothing, of course, portrays, what's going on at the time as well as photographs do. So they sent out these well-known photographers. They hired them because otherwise they weren't getting a lot of work. And they asked them to document what was going on during the Depression. So the best known of these was Dorothea Lange. She took the very, very famous photo, and you'll see it in just a moment. For Migrant Mother is the name of it. Sort of the iconic picture of the Great Depression. Took this picture over here on the right-hand side, and you can see a mom who looks absolutely just desperate. Her kid's dirty. You can see what appears to be dirt or, just a general lack of cleanliness on the faces of both kids. The toddler in her lap is drinking from a bottle. If you notice the nipples on a Coke bottle, not a traditional baby bottle or anything else like that. She's making do with what she's got. I don't know. Maybe she's wearing a fur, as far as that coat's concerned. And maybe she had better times in the past, but now she's not doing so well. And of course, that was a situation a lot of people could identify with during the Depression. And photographs like these remind us of, just how bad it really was for some people. So the Migrant Mother picture, here's a, zoomed out look of it. Normally it's zoomed in a little more. She's holding her kids, just looking off in the distance. She doesn't really look like she has any clue of what her future is going to be. She's got basically when she's living in a shelter, you can see a log is holding it up, and there's like a tarp behind her. And that's what her family's, being forced to do to, get by. They're not living in a house. They had one before. Some sort of information about the background of this picture I've seen before. And just that morning, her husband had sold literally the tires off of their vehicle because they needed to get some money to buy some food. They were just that desperate. And I have been asked before, and I still can't believe I was, people asked, was color invented about this time? No, there was always color. Color photographs, however, began to appear in small amounts. Photography itself was nothing like today, where you could just shoot off, 1,000 pictures in 10 seconds by holding down your iPhone button. Of course, they used film, and you had to choose judiciously what you took a picture of. And then even more, you had to sit there and think about it and go, wow, do I really want to, develop all these? And they all had to be developed. Unlike you hook your phone up to, a computer and you can print something out directly or send it wirelessly. You basically had to sit there and think about what was most cost effective or was it worth it? So on this picture on the right-hand side, it's from Mississippi. And, in this particular case, it's an example of a sharecropper's family. They're tenant farmers, tenant workers. They don't own the land they're working. They produce some sort of an agricultural crop on it and obviously pay off the owner. But you can see, the clothing in the back looks ragged. It's a clapboard style house over here on the side. It just doesn't look like anything that we would want today. But again, it's what people are being forced to do. And again, these folks are going around documenting things through their photography and leaving a record for those of us coming later. It wasn't all necessarily doom and gloom and awful. Ansel Adams became somewhat famous around this time. Ansel Adams, if you're not familiar with him, he's He's not alive anymore. But he was a photographer that really worked on natural beauty. And you can see that reflected over on the left-hand side out at Half Dome, which is, I believe, in Yosemite. I could be wrong. But here's a picture that Ansel Adams took, always in black and white. It really brought out a lot of depth. It brought out a lot of emotion, even though, of course, it was in black and white, which was the norm then. But still, Ansel Adams was a master of it. If you're a person who's only lived in the city, this could give you an idea of what else is going on in this great country of ours. It would also give you the idea of the fact there's still beauty, there's still light, that there's still some sort of serene pristineness somewhere left in the world when all this depression stuff's going on around you. He also took the picture on the right, and there you see a picture of a rose on wood, and I'm going to take my face off of it because obviously you don't need to see that. But you can get the sheer artistry of what's going on there. Ansel Adams wouldn't have had a job at this particular point in time, not getting any commissions from anybody, was it not for the WPA going out and saying, would you go take some really nice looking pictures? And then we're going to display them for the American public. Now you get Ansel Adams, calendar sold every year at Christmas time and whatnot, and is kind of a household name. And, now that you've heard it, you'll be like, oh, now I've seen that, in a couple of years. You was, oh, I saw that again. I saw that again. I saw that again. Oh, I guess my trail wasn't wrong. But Ansel Adams, by showing the things that he did, the natural world and the way it looked really good, basically, the national parks were not huge at this time. It wasn't a destination a lot of people had the opportunity to go to, given the limited economic means at their disposal. But did give us something to think about and maybe preserving, some of these areas of the country. And it did lead to a greater call for the very beginnings of what we today would call the environmental movement. Now, I can't show you this video right now, at least. I'll upload it so you can take a look at it. Entertainment-wise, how did people get by, during the Great Depression? There were a number of ways. One of the ways you could, we're doing it now, albeit now we're doing it where we're pretty much just doing it within our family. But, back then, of course, you could have neighbors over and didn't have to worry about getting sick. But, you can play board games. And, for instance, Monopoly gets invented during this time because a guy wants the idea of becoming rich and all that play money and everything else. And why are all those little symbols in there? Why are they not all like the same kind of thing, just different colors? Because he didn't have 5 of the same thing. So he took these little things and threw them in there and said, here, these are playing pieces. And that's how it really, truly all began. So board games were a thing. There's professional sports you could go see. Unlike today, going to a game was much, much cheaper. And now buying a ticket is usually pretty expensive unless you're going to the Marlins where they try to give those away. But that was a choice you had. Movies were another option. They were also much cheaper by comparison. The movies of the day you could get into for just literally pennies, not a penny, but maybe just a few of them. My dad remembers as a kid in the 50s, paying like a nickel to get into movies. And he would stay there through the same movie 2 or 3 times because he was a poor kid. And, he just generally wanted the escapism. And that, for a lot of people, is what these movies did. You'll see more of that coming up in just a moment. Remember, they're going through the Great Depression and, nothing's really going well. Maybe they can't find a job. They need something to escape mentally what's going on. And movies certainly were one way that people could do that by rooting for their favorite character. And unlike today, where if you want to watch the next Avengers movie, you're going to have to wait for the next 3 years to go by while they get all the special effects and whatnot. Your hero might be back on screen the next week in another movie, or 2 or 3 weeks, or a month. But they just crank these things out. And obviously, they didn't need the special effects that they have today. It was very rudimentary. It was only in 1927 you got the first film where, it had a soundtrack to it, which is where the term comes from, that you could play a movie and it would have like the music and it would have the audio, whereas before they were silent. And so this was a relatively new thing, and it was going to these was still a marvel. Look at the technology, how far we've come. But people would go to movies and enjoy themselves, but there were contests where you could win money. Things like marathon dancing contests, which are kind of exactly what they sound like. You see if you and your partner can dance longer than everybody else. And that's part of a video that, it's in here. People went and did weird things like flagpole sitting, where you climb up on top of a pole and you would lower down a basket and people would put money into it or food. And you'd sit up there for as long as you could, and people would be up there for days. and it'd be kind of a spectacle kind of thing, sort of like what David Blaine is known for today, except obviously his is much more advanced. So we'll give you an opportunity to see that video come up in a little bit. The 1930s, talking about movies, is referred to as the golden age of Hollywood. And again, a lot of the pioneering things that we take for granted today were getting their start about this particular time. Movies certainly didn't cost like they do today. I mean, to make an Avengers style film between the actors' salaries and, the special effects that have to be worked in and everything else, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Back then, it's not going to be like that. You're going to have a large budget, for instance, for horses and the amount of hay that you're going to eat. But you're not going to have, the kind of budgets you do today that'll make or break a studio if they don't work. They just crank stuff out all the time. And again, part of the point was to give people an opportunity to escape mentally from what they were experiencing by watching what was going on screen and kind of putting themselves in the shoes of the hero or the heroine, and thinking about things. You saw your first drive-ins, which just recently have sort of started having a little bit of a comeback. Since we're not allowed to go to regular movie theaters, there's been some that have been doing quite well around the country in this era of social distancing. Now you can sit in your car, roll up the windows, turn on your air conditioning, and listen to a movie and still be surrounded by other people. And isn't it wonderful? Well, drive-ins are going to be first used in 30s because, of course, you need a car to go do it. A horse isn't going to sit still long enough, and they're going to make noise. They're going to want to eat and move around and everything else. So drive-ins were pretty popular. They didn't require seats or air conditioning or anything else. Again, because people were so hard up. There's a thing called depression glass that my father-in-law collected when he was much younger. And you could go to a drive-in theater, for example, or a regular movie, and this week they might be giving out a saucer, they might be giving out a cup, or they might be giving out a bowl. And the term depression glass is because it's from the Depression. And so through him, I know there's ruby red depression glass and there's sandwich green and, different styles and whatnot. But again, you couldn't afford that stuff on your own. And, this would give you a chance to get what was, and it did look pretty nice, although it's kind of like stuff my grandma would want. But overall, movies were probably the most popular way that people were looking for that escape from what was going on around them. And there was good reason for that. So musicals were super popular then, unlike today where musicals are not super common. There were a lot of reasons that musicals were popular then, but some of the big names in the Hollywood musical history were all going on during this time. Fred Astaire was out there doing things, dancing and singing and whatnot. Shirley Temple as a kid was like the most famous and the most bankable Hollywood star of the time. Now, this particular video that I'm going to, put on for you to watch elsewhere is, Animal Crackers in My Soup. I don't know what the movie was from, but, here's this young girl, and she did this through like her very earliest teens, and then she kind of stopped this kind of a thing. But she had these curls that, she'd be out there and she'd be this little floppy, moppy kind of thing. And she was cute. She could sing and she could dance, and she just made people so happy looking at her on screen. It was different than watching an adult. Watching a kid do all this stuff, incredibly talented, was something that people really, really enjoyed. And the types of songs they sang sometimes would reflect the period as well. And you'll see more about that coming up as well. King Kong. Adventures. Do you suppose a lot of people during the Great Depression went very far? They didn't. I mean, it wasn't normal at all before the Depression to go on long vacations or go see exotic things unless you were incredibly rich. Well, an adventure film could magically transport an individual, in this case to Africa, where the mighty Kong is living in a forest. And then they're going to, story, if you don't know it, they're going to find this huge ape, and bring him to America, put him like in a zoo, in a circus kind of format, and allow people to come see this eighth wonder of the world. And again, there's a clip that you can see from all this as well. It's like bizarre. Now, what you're actually seeing in the background is another example of an adventure type film. This references Tarzan. The guy who is Tarzan in this case, the adult, is Johnny Weissmuller. He'd been an Olympic gold medalist a couple of times in the 1920s as a swimmer. Obviously, he did some swimming in the films. He was obviously physically in shape. The girl off to our left on this picture, Maureen O'Hara, is actually who my mom was named after. But again, this is something that's been redone, recently with, I can't remember the actor who was in it, but realistically speaking, Tarzan, created by Edgar Rice Burroughs, is a popular, thing for, I mean, in the 70s, there was a cartoon series I remember seeing as a kid on Saturdays. This was going on during the 30s and the 40s. And of course, this recent blockbuster that was out there with the fella I can't remember. Just for, trivia's sake, the boy's name in this picture, I mean, Tarzan had limited English ability, so his son's name was Boy. And the monkey off to the side that I guess provided some comic relief got the really imaginative name of Cheetah. And I don't know why. I wasn't in charge. But, overall, people had the opportunity to get the idea of what was going on in faraway places, tales of the mummy and all kinds of stuff like that were going on. Again, you're going to Egypt, but you don't get to go to Egypt, and you can't afford to go to Egypt because it's a Great Depression. But these kinds of things would be going on. Now, it's not altogether completely unusual now either for gangster films to be popular. Of course, Prohibition was going on at the time. These guys were involved in liquor running and gunning people down and doing all kinds of other things. And first famous example of this, the guy's name down at the bottom, that's not him in the picture. He's going to be the main character. He's the one who's going around saying, see, after all of his sentences, like, I wish I was back in school, see, that's Edward G. Robinson. He always seemed to be playing a gangster. And again, we've got movies like Scarface and Godfather and Casino and all these other things that still today are quite popular. But here are these individuals who are thumbing their nose at the law, and they're wearing flashy suits, and they got really great cars, and they hang out with really, hot women. And, it was a thing that a lot of people said, oh, I wish I could do that kind of stuff. And in some cases, maybe they did, or they were, but the gangster films were really popular during this era. A lot of people, of course, wanted to drink, and it was illegal. But here they are, sort of getting around the system. So whereas Edward G. Robinson was one of the guys, another one that was very famous was James Cagney. He's going to win an Academy Award for something much more patriotic later on in Yankee Doodle Dandy, playing George Cohan. You'll see him in this particular clip if you watch all the clips. He's going to be the one who's going out there and forcing a bar owner to take his illegal distillery's beer and sell his beer as opposed to somebody else's. And he, was a famous actor. But again, these two were like huge stars in the 1930s because, again, they sort of represented the I'm going to get away with whatever I want, and doesn't seem to be any real penalty for it. And I'm rich and I get all this benefit and so forth and so on. Now, escapism. Now, if you look in the background over here, you see Mickey Mouse, and we all like Mickey Mouse. He helps bank, he basically bankrolls Florida. But the very first Walt Disney anything that comes out under the Walt Disney name is in 1927, or is it 1924? But it's a short, aka we'd call it a cartoon today, and it's got Mickey Mouse in it, and they got popular, and they would put these things before films, like full length films. There was no Walt Disney like movie studio quite yet because there is no Walt Disney movie until 1938. The very first one of these. So it's 1928 it comes out. I was being wrong all over the place. But the very first film that Disney puts out, full-length film, is not a live-action film. It is the drawn-by-hand, every single frame film of, anybody want to take a wild guess? It's Snow White. Well, in this case, Snow White is a real gamble. Nobody's ever animated anything that long. When people like it, well, one thing they like about it is that it's done in color. And again, color was still very, very rare. It was a shocking thing, and you'll see it come up in The Wizard of Oz in a moment when Dorothy goes from black and white to a color place. It's like, whoa! But this whole film is hand-drawn, every single frame. And Snow White, of course, is a classic character, and there's music, and there's entertainment, and there's romance. And then there's some guys that also hang out with Snow White, 7 little dudes. You might know them as the 7 dwarves. Well, what's their famous song called? How about Whistle While You Work? You're working. You're happy. You're happy to be working. Where are they working? They're working in a gem mine that all they have to do is literally take a pick out and start just hacking at the wall a little bit, and diamonds fall out or rubies fall out. And, who wouldn't want that? So anybody watching that would be like, oh, wouldn't that be great if that was happening to us? The music's catchy. The idea is catchy. The girl who was poisoned gets the prince. They ride off into the sunset. Everything's wonderful at the end. I mean, again, it's the Great Depression. Wouldn't you want some sort of a happy story to bring you out of it a little bit? Of course you would, and that's why it was a movie that did extremely well. And the popularity of the film led to the creation of the full length motion picture industry for Disney, and would essentially be responsible for what we know today as the Disney company. Now, another type of film that was popular during the era were known as message films. There was a message they're trying to get across. You don't see an inset picture here too well. Oh, there it is. This is an example of one. There was a famous movie director at the time called Frank Capra. He's going to do some work in World War II, which is significant. Learn more about that next year. But he does a couple of films. One of them is a holiday classic. Oh boy. It's the one where Jimmy Stewart, this actor, says, I wish I'd never been born. And I can't remember what it's called. And they showed him what life would be like if he'd never been born. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington has this actor by the name of Jimmy Stewart, who himself goes on to become a bomber pilot in World War II and lead a whole bunch of missions. And he really takes some risks. Eventually becomes a general in the Air Force in the Reserve. But in this particular film, he's an idealistic, very young guy who is asked to become a U.S. Senator. Now, remember again, before the 16th Amendment, I think it was, or 17th Amendment, when senators died in office, instead of the people like picking their replacement, the governor would choose somebody, with the input of some other political bigwigs. And so that's what happens in this film. He gets named to go off to Congress, and they think that he's going to be so young and naive they could control how he votes and what he's going to do, tell him what to do, and he's just going to do it because he's like, you must know more than I do. You're a respected politician. But he's got something he's really into. It's kind of like the Boy Scouts, but he wants to build these camps essentially for boys to go off, not girls. But he wants to build these places for boys to go learn about civics and citizenship and taking care of others and, becoming good citizens and whatnot. And he runs up in the film against, this huge political machine that wants to use it for corruption purposes, sell off the land that he has been promised essentially for like mineral rights or development or something's going on. And it's this whole big impassioned thing. And if you watch the clip that goes with Mr. Smith, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He gets up there, he's idealistic, and he wants everything to stand for what it should be ideally. You got to see the Capitol Dome and what it stands for and what the American flag stands for, what we've done to get to that point. Again, it's the 30s. But later on, he's going to have to rally people back home to support his cause against the political machine. And he goes and filibusters, and it's this whole big thing, and he collapses at the end, and the political machine's leader is like, I'm so sorry, and he admits to everything. And, it's about doing the right thing. And, here he is, an idealistic individual who looks like he's about to get pummeled by the system. And in the end, good wins out and reminds us, of what, we should be guided by our better angels, as it's called. So Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is one of those. Now, there's also a message to, The Wizard of Oz, as much as you might think it's just Judy Garland singing at you or something. But remember, again, this was a film that started out in black and white. And then, that's when she's in Kansas and it's drab and it's a ho-hum lifestyle and everything else. And then, the tornado comes and whisks her off and she wakes up and she's in a magical place of Oz. And again, it's magical because it's full of color. And, there's a yellow brick road that's supposedly made of gold that, again, who wouldn't want that in the Great Depression? And she's going to meet up with these individuals and have all these adventures, of course. And, it's going to be a really big deal. Now, when Judy Garland sings the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and if you listen to the lyrics about it, it's all about wishing for a better life and a better lifestyle and, things to be better. It's something that could resonate with people. Unfortunately for the movie, it didn't do so well at the time, not like a huge blockbuster like we know today. It began to appear every year on TV, and after a while became just absolutely legendary. And now there's songs, of course, that everybody's heard before. But the messages that L. Frank Baum, the original author who wrote the book that this movie was based on, they did essentially create this mentality of, a better world, a better place, a better tomorrow kind of thing going on. And as a result of that, that really caused people to, have something to mentally escape to while they were living in the Great Depression. Now, prestige films. Oh man, do they put a lot of effort into these? You might have 10,000 people on horseback, riding forward to look like, something from, Middle Ages or something. A lot of these were based on classic stories, but in one example, The Gone with the Wind, it was a book that was fairly new at the time, written by Margaret Mitchell. She was still alive at the time. And it was a huge epic. If you've never seen the entire film, which get a lot of popcorn, it's like 4 hours long. And they tell this huge, long story. As you're aware of some of this, we've seen part of it. But they tell the story of a family, particularly Scarlett O'Hara, and her family's troubles before before the Civil War, during the Civil War, and after the Civil War. All the stuff that they're going through. It was a huge Hollywood, production. Had some huge names in it at the time. Although you watch the movie and you hear how they sound Southern, majority of them were in fact British stars at the time. But so this scene here, Scarlett's going out there, and if you play it, and as God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again. Here's a woman who was at the height of society, was in a very wealthy family and everything else. Now she's reduced to going out looking for a scraggly carrot that's growing in the ground and not even waiting to rinse it off. She's not even going to share it with her family. She's going to be like, I'm going to eat it now. And, as God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again. And, if I have to lie, cheat, or steal. Now, I'm sure a lot of people could have identified with that during the Great Depression because they were just that desperate. And they will never, ever be in that position again. Given an opportunity to succeed, they will never, ever be that unfortunate again. So obviously, you got some clips to watch there, but, something to note there is that movies were an opportunity for people to mentally escape during the Great Depression. Now, music was another thing that also distracted people. You can have performances. Again, this is through the WPA, Works Progress Administration. You can see that in the picture down here on the bottom, the Works Progress Administration. Whoops. And it's part of the Federal Music Project. But again, if you're a professional trombonist and you're expecting that to pay your bills, it's going to be kind of hard to find a job unless the government's going to make it possible for you to go entertain others. So they did hire some things out. They did tours, and they went and visited towns and cities and played for virtually nothing, if anything. And some of these individuals did become quite well known. Woody Guthrie becomes sort of like this standard bearer of the era musically. Aaron Copland, Fanfare for the Common Man, being something he composed. He's a composer. But they also said, you know what, if we don't teach people how to play music, that next generation of people, because they're not getting, music education in schools, because they strip everything to the bare bones, they say, you know what, if we don't do more to make sure there's another generation of musicians, there will be no music in future generations. So the federal government not only paid for these musical artists to go around and perform for people, but they also taught people how to play different instruments and guaranteed that, down the road, there'd be somebody to entertain everybody. So the Federal Music Project, as you can see here, had 16,000 people across the country that they employed at one point or another. Millions of people took the opportunity to go see these free things going on. If you were not see, there we go, look at that. The Colored Concert Band. There's something you'd never see today. Obviously, we don't refer to people as colored because everybody's got a color. But in this case, it was something that really did a lot to advance music education and music appreciation at the time. Maybe before you didn't have a lot of time to go to some highfalutin symphonic orchestra performance and see somebody perform. Well, now you could. And maybe you go, well, I really kind of enjoyed that. And music was sweeping, and that was Bach. I didn't know that. Or you get somebody who was a singer going out and doing the same thing. And it really helped people sort of forget what was going on around them again. Of course, during this era, the 1920s led to the 30s. In the 20s, you had blues and jazz, and you had swing, and it was, people going out and going clubbing and having a great time, and dancing up a storm. But this would continue. The music that was popular in the 20s was popular during the 30s. And you get some people who were very well known. There you see over on the middle left, there's me on the top, and then there's Duke Ellington right here. Louis Armstrong, famous for having a trumpet. But, basically you had a lot of big bands that were going out and playing. Here's Glenn Miller down here on the bottom. As the Depression gave way to World War II, Glenn Miller actually volunteered and joined the military to form a military band. And he entertained troops all over the place, did some fundraisers and other things, and mysteriously died when his plane took off on a mission, or not mission, but he was going from place A to place B to get ready for the next performance, and his plane disappeared and has never been seen since, and nobody knows what happened. But Benny Goodman, and you'll hear his name next year if we're watching the movie Swing Kids. Trust me. He was Jewish, and everybody knew it here. That wasn't a big deal here, but in Germany, it was a big deal, and we'll talk about that next year. But musicals and theater became again a distraction. It was affordable, it was cheap, people wanted to go see it, and as a result, they had the opportunity to be enjoying things. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do this week is I'm going to ask you to both play the song and read along. This is an important thing. I want you to play the song and read along with the lyrics. Brother, can you spare a dime? And listen to what the guy is saying. It's a very important thing that you listen to what he's saying during the course of the song. So that's why you have the lyrics out in front of you to know exactly what's going on. This is not a person who's like, hey, I'm a bum, I've never done anything, I don't deserve, I deserve, free handouts. He's not saying that at all. And I'll let you read more into that as you literally read along. A wistful song talking about, this idea of what's going to happen if we suddenly get rich. And here you see a nice looking car in front of a nice looking house that a lot of people would have dreamed of. But that song is We're in the Money. So I'm asking you to look and listen to that one. The NRA Blues is kind of a fun song. In this case, it is a song that, is talking about the National Recovery Administration thing that made sure that, Malik and Josh didn't try to outdo each other in the shoe industry, setting the same wages and the same rates and the same shifts and so forth and so on. You can listen to that one. This one I really like. If I ever get a job again, this one's really, really, it's got some funny stuff in there, especially towards the end. I'm not going to give it away, but let's just say if you don't listen to the song, you're not going to get the question right on the rating check. So too bad for you. We're not going to worry about Franklin Roosevelt's back again. Old age pension check. I might have you listen to that one. That one as well is kind of a funny thing, but they're talking about the Social Security program and, what that's going to allow old people to do as a result of things. So the last thing we got to look at is literature and some musical, or not musical, but, performing arts type stuff. A lot of people, of course, were writing about stuff that was going on at the time. One of the individuals there, you see John Steinbeck. John Steinbeck is the author of Mice and Men, which is, of course, an extraordinarily famous book, dark, but then again, so is he. He also writes The Grapes of Wrath. And if we were in normal class, we'd watch the movie and you'd see all about the Jodes and what they're going through. They're a group of Okies that are forced to go from Oklahoma, obviously, out to California looking for work and the really difficult things that happened to them along the way. Again, completely reflected stuff that was going on at the time. Anybody who was alive then would recognize easily the characters as, sort of like characters themselves. I can't play this, so we're going to have to just move forward. William Faulkner is another one. He's from Mississippi, and he writes The Sound and the Fury about how a family that had been really super powerful, rich, and successful loses it all, and what they're going through as a result. And again, you see the same thing kind of, but in a different era. Absalom at 36. A poor white family, is going to get a chance to do well, and then it's going to come crashing back down in an era where, again, it's not economically that prosperous in the South in the Reconstruction era when it's taking place. Ernest Hemingway, yet another one. A lot of literature teachers always like, I hate Hemingway. I mean, I don't know. One of my books I really enjoy is Old Man and the Sea. But how about a guy who has to turn from something legitimate like being a boat captain to smuggling? Whether it's alcohol or any one of a number of other things, just simply to stay fed and to keep his bills paid in the Depression era. And again, that reflects what's going on during that time. Thornton Wilder, this is him over here sitting on the stool. There's a minimalist play that, I had to read in high school at least twice. Like, I had to read it junior year, went to a different high school, and I had to read it like my senior year. And I was like, geez, Liz. But it's a drama called Our Town. You're talking like there's a fake brick wall behind you, and then there's a couple of ladders out where people are doing various things with. You can see those reflected here. That's standard in like every production. It's not huge sets. But it's about the lives of these two families, who live next door to each other from, just a little before World War I on to a little bit later. And again, the bleakness of the Depression factors in there. Another one, Clifford Odets, you can kind of call him like a pro-socialist writer almost. A lot of his stuff, was about the downtrodden nature of what was going on for the average worker. For example, the play Waiting for Lefty, about a taxi driver strike. Again, when people are worried about the potential rise of communism when things aren't going so well, this would be something that, would cause some people to go, hey, wait a minute, what are you trying to do there? So this has been a look at the distractions during the Great Depression. Notably, looked at things that were involved with music and with movies and with literature and so forth. But anyhow, this is the next to last presentation of the year. Hope you learned something along the way.